Hello, Year 2. Welcome to one of my most favourite lessons of the week, and it is our Lunar lesson for today. It is Friday, the 22nd of January, and let's find out what we're going to be learning in Lunar today. Now remember, in Lunar, we are in a time over a century ago. So we are in a time over 100 years ago. What time are we currently looking at? The Victorians. And in our first Victorian lesson, we learnt about Queen Victoria, who is the monarch at the time. Last week, we learnt about a family, the Brewster family, whose mother was in a bit of trouble. And she realised that in order to save her family, she had to sell her son. And in the last lesson, we learnt that child labour, children having a job, is perfectly normal. Let's find out what we are learning today. In today's lesson, we are going to know that schools were only for rich and wealthy children. And we're also going to know that for poor children, child labour was completely normal. So there are two images on the screen right now. There's one of a lovely Victorian school, and then there's one of children who are in a factory working. And as we've said, we're going to know by the end of this lesson that child labour was perfectly normal, and I'm going to tell you a story about a little boy who had to work. Okay, here is what we looked at last lesson. In our last lesson, I shown you this picture. I introduced you to Mrs. Brewster. There she is, and I introduced you to William Wire, there he is, and I also introduced you to George, and I told you that William Wire was knocking on the door of Mrs. Brewster's house, and he wanted to buy George, he wanted to take George to become a chimney sweep, and we know by the end of the lesson Mrs. Brewster agreed. She said yes because they were very poor, her husband was very sick, they had no money, they didn't want to be evicted, which meant that they would have to leave their home. So she did make the tough decision to sell George. But then we learned that actually child labour was perfectly normal. So children doing these jobs was normal. And you can see there's a little boy in the background. He's clearly working hard, he's carrying lots of different things. So we learned that that was normal. Okay, just to warm up our brains, our lunar brains, I guess they are today, I would like you to look at this with me on the screen, and we're going to review what we learnt last lesson. And what I've got here is some keywords and then some definitions. So with your help, I want to match up the keyword to its definition. The first one says century. Now I know that a century means 100 years. So I'm going to look down my list. Aha, a period of 100 years. I'm going to match it up. Let's look at the next one, poverty. Now I told you last week that if someone is suffering from poverty, it means that they're poor. And I can see here it says the state of being extremely poor. So I'm going to match that up. Can you pause the video and have a little discussion with your grown-up, if you've got somebody working with you, about the other three words and which one of those it matches up to? So we've got 3 left here. Pause the video now and figure out which one matches up with which. Okay, hopefully you paused the video and had a little discussion about it. You didn't have to write anything down, just a little chat is good enough. So the next word said monarchy. Now I know that a monarch is a king or queen, so it must match up to this one, a form of government with a king or queen at its head. Master sweep, the person in charge of chimney sweeps or the employment of children. I know that a master sweep, just like William Wire, was the person in charge of chimney sweeps. And then finally, child labour must mean the employment of children. Don't worry if you didn't remember any of those key words from last time, at least we've had a look at them together now. Okay, I have some questions that I would really like you to think about right now. You don't need to write down the answers, it's just a discussion. Why did Mrs. Brewster sell her son? She sold her son because they simply had no money. And she didn't really know what else to do. She couldn't go out and get a job, and her husband was very sick, so she knew she had to do something about it. And the next question I've got for you is, why did William Wire want to buy George? What did William Wire do that made him want to buy George? He's the master sweep, isn't he? He wanted to buy George so George could become a chimney sweep. And again, just to refresh your mind, that was the picture and that was the exchange happening, wasn't it? That was William Wire giving Mrs. Brewster some money for her George. Okay, just before we move on and I tell you a story about somebody, do you think George will be looked after? Pause the video, again, have a little chat to your grown-up if you've got one working with you. Do you think George will be looked after? Why or why not? Pause the video here and have a little discussion. Now, some of you might think that he will be looked after because Mr. Wire in the last lesson said that he would give him food, he would make sure he had somewhere to stay, and he did actually promise Mrs. Brewster that George would be looked after. So some of you might have said yes. Some of you might have said no, actually. Some of you might have said that George will be living in some not nice conditions. And you know what? We are about to find out exactly what it was like for a child to become a chimney sweep in London. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story again, just like I usually do in our Lunar lesson. I normally tell you a story, or I pretend to be somebody. I'm going to tell you a story. So make sure that you are sitting comfortably and you have your listening ears switched on. Let's say that we are in a cellar. There are lots of boys asleep, but there are no beds. The boys are sleeping on sacks on the floor. They are all very dirty, and some of them are coughing really loudly. There's a little boy, and he's really tired because he's been working all day, and now he cannot sleep. He cannot remember the last time that he had a day off, and he's been thinking about his family, and he's wondering if he will ever see them again. He hasn't seen his mother since she sold him, and that was years ago. Who do you think this boy is that I'm talking about? Who do you think the little boy is that I'm talking about sleeping in this cellar? He hasn't seen his mum in years since she sold him. It's George. I'm going to tell you a story about George Brewster, the chimney sweep. If the little boy is sleeping on a sack on the floor, and there's lots of boys and they're all coughing loudly and they're all really dirty, does it sound like they're being cared for? Think about the rights that you have as a child, and we always look at our rights in school. Do those boys have any rights at the moment? They have rights, but they're not being treated correctly, are they? They're not being looked after. So let me tell you a bit more about him. Okay, let's say I am the little boy in the picture, and I'm going to tell you some information. I am a chimney sweep. Would you like to become a chimney sweep? You're about the right age. I don't think you would though. Let me tell you a little bit about my job. Firstly, every day I have to get up at 4 a.m. Then all the boys are sent off on a job around London to clean the chimneys. My job is really important because if the chimneys aren't cleaned, the soot can catch fire and actually burn buildings down. My friend Billy, he says it's the most important job in London. Now, you have to be really good at cleaning and also really brave to be a chimney sweep. I have to crawl up chimneys that are this small. Some of the chimneys have twists and turns in them, just like the one on the screen now. And some of the boys can get stuck in there. Oh, boys and girls, let me show you this. So this here is an example of a Victorian chimney, and a Victorian chimney is roughly about 9 inches by 9 inches. Now, the one that I'm holding up here, the piece of paper that I'm holding up, you can see the size of it compared to just my head. You can see the size of it compared to my face. This was the size that children would have had to have climbed up, and that's why they would have been anything from 5 or 6 years old to fit up there. Now, usually what would happen if we were doing this in the classroom, I would put this piece of paper or card on the floor, and I would ask some of you to come and stand in the middle of it. So if you wanted to see what that would be like, then it's 9 inches by 9 inches. You'll need a grown-up to draw this for you and cut it out. But if you wanted to stand just on the paper, you'd be able to see just how small that actually is for someone to climb up, especially when, if you look at the image on the screen now, it twists and it turns. So it must have been quite frightening, mustn't it, for a little child? Mr. Wire gets really angry if you get stuck. If you do, another boy has to come up the chimney to help you get free. If they can't help, then the whole chimney has to be pulled down. Mr. Wire is furious when this happens because he actually has to pay for it. I've only ever got stuck once, and that was when I first started out. They didn't have to pull the chimney down though for me. I think I'm actually one of the best chimney sweeps in London. And take a look at the picture. The men are pulling down the chimney, and there's a lady, she's so sad that somebody has even become stuck up there, but they're pulling down the chimney. Now, you don't get paid being a chimney sweep. Mr. Wire keeps all the money. He does give us somewhere to stay though, and he even gives us a little bit of food. We get to bath 3 times a year. But you have to make sure that you're the first one in the tub, because otherwise the water's all black. My favourite day of the year is May Day. This is the first day of May, and all the chimney sweeps get to have a day off, and we're allowed to get up a little bit later, and we're allowed to parade round the streets. There's a big party, and it's a lot of fun. Now, unfortunately, in George's lifetime, throughout the time of him being a chimney sweep, he did actually become stuck in a chimney, and they had to pull the chimney down to free him as he became a bit older. And sadly, he became really, really poorly after that, and he had to stop being a chimney sweep. And George Brewster was actually the last child, the last chimney sweep to get stuck in a chimney. And because of him, the law around chimney sweeps, so the rules around chimney sweeps, began to change, all because of him. He was the last child to become stuck in a chimney, and the grown-ups around him realised that it was time to do something about chimney sweeps and children working, and the laws, the rules, began to change. In today's lesson, I would like you guys to write me a job advert for a chimney sweep. Now, this can be a little bit silly because obviously a child being a chimney sweep is not a great job, but we're going to write a job advert for a chimney sweep. We're going to imagine that someone might look at it and they'll read it and they'll think, oh, is that what a chimney sweep's about? I'm not sure if that's for me. On Microsoft Teams, the worksheet, like the one that's on the screen now, is there for you to use if you want to. If you don't want to use the worksheet, you could actually do it on a piece of paper and you could design it however you wanted to design it. Now, what I've decided is that I'm going to go through each part of this job description a step at a time. So if you're sitting at home and you're a little bit stuck on what to write, I'm going to be doing it a little bit at a time. So you could grab yourself the worksheet or some paper and a pencil or pen, and you could actually do this now at the same time as me. So the first section that I'm going to look at is this bit here at the top. It's here, this bit at the top, and I've put it big on the screen so that you can see it. There are 5 pieces of key information that we need to fill in first on our job description. Let's just get rid of those lines. Okay, so the job, of course, is a chimney sweep. The age, I've said, is between 4 and 10 years old, because once they reach over 10, there's no way they're climbing through a space that small. Where, I put London City, because that's where it is. Pay, I've put a penny or two, if you are lucky, because like George just told us, they weren't always paid. Hours, 16 hours every day, 6 or 7 days a week. And I've put a Sunday off every now and then. So what you guys could do is pause the video and fill in the top part of your job advert now. You could magpie some of mine. You might want to improve some of mine. Pause the video and fill in the top part of the job description. Let's move on to the second part. The second part is this section here, and it says duties. Now, when you see a job description, especially when you're an adult, it might tell you some of the things that you'll have to do if you get that job. And that's what this means, the duties, the types of things that you'll have to do. So let's take a look. Here's mine. I've put the duties are climbing chimneys of rich people and cleaning out the soot so fires don't start, carrying heavy equipment and working quickly. And I've put not being clumsy or being distracted. Those are the main duties of a chimney sweep. Again, pause the video here and fill in the duties part of your job description. Remember, you could magpie some of mine, you could change my sentences. You also might remember something else that George Brewster told you when he was talking to you a minute ago, and you might want to include one of those too, or something that he said. Okay, now this is the final part of the job description. It's the extra information part. And so here's what I've put as my extra information for the chimney sweeps. You will have salt rubbed into your legs, fires being lit below you to speed you up, coal dust falling into your lungs and eyes, and of course, smoke everywhere. If you survive all that, we will eventually sack you and replace you with a younger boy. We may reward you with 1 day a year off and promise some quite nice accommodation, surrounded by 20 to 30 other chimney sweeps. You will be fed small scraps of food and you'll have to sleep on a sack. Do you think you are cut out for this job? Again, you could pause the video here, you could use some of this information, you could use some of your own information, you could use some of what George Brewster told you. The great thing about this being a video is that you can go back, you can listen, you can come back and keep swapping the parts where you're up to. I would also like to say you don't have to fill in lots and lots of sentences for all of the parts. You write as much as you are comfortable writing. I can't wait to see these job descriptions, boys and girls, and I really hope you've learnt a lot about how child labour was normal for Victorian children, and hopefully you've seen a little bit more information about something that a child at your age, 6 or 7, might have had to do. Well done, boys and girls.